All right, folks. We got another live stream going here, and I'm going to tell you why. It's because we have a serious situation on our hands, and it involves the southwest coast of Florida. That's right. Whether you realize it or not right now, we've got a major disaster off the southwest coast of Florida right now. We've got a red tide situation. Now, this red tide is killing marine life like nobody's business over there. And I don't mind telling you that the majority of my life I spent in or on or around the ocean. And what's happening in Florida right now is an absolute disaster. And I'm here to tell you that you should all be concerned. Now, we are being told that what's happening in Florida is a natural phenomenon, which I'm not disagreeing with. But what has caused this natural phenomenon to have become so extensive, so large, and so long-lasting is the point of my discussion tonight. Red tides are caused by microorganisms that live in the ocean and in freshwater sources as well. When these microorganisms, cyanobacteria, dinoflagellates, other types of microorganisms get out of control and multiply like crazy, they cause what's called an algae bloom. And once they get out of control, the oxygen depletes, the sunlight depletes in the water, and the chemistry of the water changes, making it uninhabitable for a lot of the fish. And in some cases, toxins are secreted by the metabolic processes of these microorganisms. Have I bored you enough yet with the details? Well, look, the water's filthy red and it's killing all the fish, and it's been going for 9 months, and they don't last that long, folks. They're not supposed to. These algae blooms normally kind of burn themselves out. Now, this one's not for some reason. Why is that? Well, it all started last year when the weather controllers decided to, don't give me a hard time about drinking bottled water, it's all I have right now. The weather controllers decided to give Puerto Rico the hurricane experience of a lifetime. And what happened to that independent little province of the United States, and by the way, it is part of the United States, and you would never know by the way the media has ignored the plight of our brothers and sisters in Puerto Rico, even though most of the country is still without electricity and running water. Kind of like the Middle East after the United States bombed them back to the Stone Age after the inside job called 9/11 was allowed to go down. You know, we got a bunch of people in the Middle East that were bombed back to the Stone Age without any electricity, without any water. And so, you know, the people that run our weather and our State Department and the military and these NORAD, NEXRAD, and millimeter wave and microwave radar installations that control our weather in conjunction with the HAARP and other types of ground-based weather modification systems are not your friends, ladies and gentlemen. And you know, out in California, it's bad because when they modify the weather out here, it just doesn't rain, and then these knucklehead morons on the local city councils all go along with that ugly freak in Sacramento, Jerry Brown, that Agenda 21 eugenicist Jesuit operative of the New World Order, tells everybody in California that you got to have a 50-gallon-a-day minimum, maximum usage. All this weather modification is coming home to roost, ladies and gentlemen. And it's not just the United States where the water skips over California, skips over the Rockies, and ends up flooding the Mississippi Valley and getting into the Gulf Stream and turning the Northeast into a psychopathic black ice pile with tornadoes and lightning strikes and thunderstorms and floods that suck people down storm drains and submerge cars and float houses away. It also affected Puerto Rico. and it wiped out an entire landmass that had been run by a bunch of corrupt thugs for a very long time. And Puerto Rico, for lack of a better term, was a shit pile before the hurricane even hit it. And excuse the French, but that's what it was. And when I say that figuratively, I mean that literally, because if you were to drive around that country before that hurricane hit, you would have piles of toxic waste, you would have ponds of raw sewage, you would have open-air garbage dumps halfway the size of the Empire State Building. Well, maybe not that tall, but mounds of garbage and trash and industrial waste. But I want to take your attention to a specific component that I believe is directly implicated in what is happening in Florida. Because the red tides that are happening in Florida are a direct result of a combination of three things. And that is the Gulf Stream currents, the hurricane that hit Puerto Rico last year, and all the piles of garbage and industrial waste that were open air piles in Puerto Rico. You see, what happened when this hurricane hit is all that crap got washed into the water. And you know what happens when things end up in the ocean, right? They end up swirling around and being carried away by the currents. Well, ladies and gentlemen, the oceans are a closed system, and the currents, the way they run in the Gulf region, if you will pay particular attention, will eventually bring all of that waste, debris, trash, and toxic effluent from manufacturing and sewage and regular old trash disposal right slammed up against the southwestern coast of Florida. This problem is not from local runoff in Florida. It is not from groundwater discharge in Florida. This problem is the slow but tedious and consistent deposit of the waste and wreckage and refuse from the hurricane that wiped the shit piles off the face of Puerto Rico and put them into the open air currents, which are now washing up and slathing up on the southwestern coast of Florida, feeding the biomass that has turned into the worst algae bloom in Florida history with no end in sight. Because guess what? All the stuff that was dumped into the ocean a year ago is still out there, and it's heading towards Florida. This algae bloom is going to get a lot worse. Now, why is nobody in the media talking about this? Well, who runs the media, ladies and gentlemen? Who runs Fox News and ABC and Viacom and Disney and all these degenerate, lying scumbag outfits that never tell you the truth, that have little boys kissing each other and pill commercials and drug commercials and soda pop commercials and junk food commercials and people taking their clothes off and vampires and satanic bloodlust and all kinds of satanic Illuminati disgusting garbage on their programs every night. Those are the people that run the media, so you're never going to get the truth out of them. But the truth of the matter is that our brothers and sisters in Puerto Rico are still in harm's way, and nobody cares. They're for the most part been forgotten. And so the penalty for the price of forgetting our brothers and sisters is that we reap the whirlwind of the winds of apathy that we sow. Because I'll give you an example. Fly ash and coal ash piles in Puerto Rico were open air piles. It is a scientific fact that once coal ash or fly ash is deposited into the soil or the marine environment, they permanently affect the concentrations of nitrogen and phosphorus in the soil and the water. And the nitrogen and phosphorus levels are required for these algal blooms to continue. And this is the mechanism by which the red tide in Florida has become an apocalyptic scenario because of all of the waste and pollution, coal ash and fly ash, human waste, toxic waste, industrial waste, organic matter decomposition that has found its way through the Gulf Stream currents, washing up on the southwestern coast of Florida. Folks, that's what's going on in Florida, and that red tide is a mess. And it is a severely hazardous situation that is out of control. It is not a function of what's being dumped into the mangrove forest or down the rivers over there. You couldn't dump enough crap in those rivers to cause a red tide of this epic proportion. What you had was basically an island nation that stored its trash outside in the open air, have it all swept off the table right into the ocean. And those currents have been mixing and frothing that around and bringing it right back to the last stop in the Gulf Stream. Take a look at the maps and you'll see where this stuff is depositing, and you will see that it directly correlates with the areas of the highest concentration of these dinoflagellate, cyanobacteria, and other microorganism explosive growth scenarios off the southwestern coast of Florida. Now, why am I bringing this up? Well, it's because, you know, the United States has become a country that has been turned into a bunch of people that only care about themselves and their little circle they live in. And we can't be that way. I can tell you right now that unless we start caring for other people around us, and no, I'm not talking about giving 20 bucks to the tweaker that's going to take that money and buy a bunch of heroin and slam it into his veins tonight, that's living under the bridge at the riverbed, and leave his dirty needle on the ground so it gets washed down in the next rain and ends up on the beach and somebody steps on it and gets AIDS from it. I'm not talking about those people, folks. I'm talking about your brothers and sisters that are in serious need because of circumstances beyond their control, not self-inflicted, reckless, stupid behavior that we're already paying for 100 times over with social programs. And our brothers and sisters in Puerto Rico are in need. And the solution is not to ignore it because the media is ignoring it. The solution is not to ignore it because these crooked churches that steal everybody's money are ignoring it. The solution is for us to do something about this, and it starts with contacting your legislators, and it starts with contacting people that can make the decisions to move large sums of money into relief efforts over there, and those would be the religious institutions. And if you're part of some of these mega churches, well, then I suggest you start putting the screws to some of these people that are picking your pockets every Sunday and ask them why aren't they doing what they're supposed to do with all the money they're taking in. But that's a discussion for another night. The point I'm making is that we're going to face the judgment of Almighty God for ignoring the plight of our brothers and sisters. And we can't sit here and continue to pretend like Puerto Rico is not part of the United States, because guess what? What's going to stop these people from creating a big seismic event on the New Madrid or the San Andreas? And of course the people on the East Coast or on the West Coast that aren't affected by this are just going to go about their lives as hundreds of millions of people will be without electricity and water for months. Well, folks, that's exactly what could happen. And based on the behavior of the United States government and the churches and the residents of this great nation, that nightmare could become a reality for people that actually live on this continent that are separated merely by a couple of miles of interstate. Because the truth of the matter is, Puerto Rico's not that far away from the United States, and look what's happening. There's always a logical solution and reason for what is happening. And to ignore what happened to Puerto Rico is not going to make the problem in Florida go away. If any of you are in Florida right now, you need to contact your county commissioners and your governor and tell them what the problem is and what's causing this problem, and ask them what they plan on doing about it, because it's going to get worse. They need to go directly to intervention and begin to remove the phosphorus and the nitrogen compounds out of the ocean water. And there are ways that can be done. There are massive filtration systems that are available, that are in existence, that can be deployed, and they must be. Otherwise, this problem will result in a sort of China syndrome that will continue to get worse and worse and worse, because the more these microorganisms multiply and kill more fish, the more nitrogen and phosphorus is released into the ocean that will continue the expansion of the algal bloom, that will continue the destruction of all the marine life, which will continue the cycle. The red tide bloom in Florida is a direct result of the hurricane that hit Puerto Rico last year. All of the chemical waste, excrement, raw sewage, industrial waste, coal ash, fly ash from the industrial processes and coal-powered electricity generation have hit the waters of Florida through a good amount of mixing in the Gulf Stream and getting washed up on those shores. And that is the cause, ladies and gentlemen. And the reason I'm bringing this information to you tonight is because we must do something about what we've ignored in Puerto Rico. The problem there is worse than ever. There are people there that are dying. The death count has been totally underreported. People are starving to death in Puerto Rico. They don't have fresh water. The people in Florida are going to start getting really sick, because what happens in these situations with these massive blooms of these toxic microorganisms, combined with all of the antibiotics and the chemicals and the medical waste that is in this ocean water, once it is deposited on the beaches, it dries up and becomes airborne. And when you start inhaling these things, mark my words, folks, you're going to see a pandemic come out of Florida. You're going to see airborne disease come out of Florida. And this could be the backdrop of a staged event that will be used to force vaccinate and possibly even quarantine or relocate people in Southwest Florida. I do believe that is a distinct possibility. In the meantime, for all of you out there listening, I hope you enjoy these videos. We're going to keep this one short because we're probably going to have another one coming back tonight about 9:30 or 10 o'clock. So make sure you tune in if we can get the transmission going. Keep your eyes and ears open, folks, and pray for those people in Florida that are about to suffer at the hands of the weather controllers, because once again, that red tide in Florida is a direct result of the weather modification that caused the intensification and redirection of that hurricane, installing that hurricane right over Puerto Rico to run another test on what happens to a society that is brought to its knees with a crippled infrastructure grid. And we're just dealing with the fallout of that right now. We must speak out against weather modification and the controllers, and most importantly, folks, we must have a sense of self-reliance to be prepared for disasters. All right? That's just common sense. All right, this is Joe Imbriano, the Fullerton Informer. I'm going to be signing off for now, folks. I hope you have a nice evening.